Hello and welcome, I'm King Gaudi from Sax Comprehensive, and in this video we will look at some altissimo fingerings for the alto saxophone. In my last video on the altissimo range, altissimo for beginners, I gave some tips on how to get these altissimo notes to come out, and some of those tips are listed here. Because as a beginner, when you try to play these altissimo notes, you may find that you struggle a bit with it. You may actually get a squeak because you're biting down too hard on the mouthpiece, or maybe more commonly you produce a lower note than the note that you're trying to achieve. You actually produce a lower overtone than the note that you are aiming for. So it might be a good idea to watch that video first and then come back to this video. So let's look at some of these finger positions for the altissimo range on the alto saxophone. We will start by writing out the chromatic scale, starting with high D played with a palm D key. And since we're talking about the altissimo range on the alto saxophone, let's also write out their concert pitch equivalent, the notes you would see on an ordinary tuner when playing the chromatic scale. For the first 5 notes of the chromatic scale, from palm D to high F sharp, you can use the palm keys and the high F sharp key fingerings, or the alternate notes for E, F and F sharp shown in the previous video using the front F key. From here, there are various fingerings we can use to proceed up the chromatic scale, but first let's talk about overblowing notes. When you play any note on the saxophone, you can produce other notes using the same fingering by manipulating your tongue and throat. Just like when you play overtones, you can finger the lowest note, the fundamental, and produce several notes from that harmonic series. The same is true for other notes. If we start with the palm D fingering, by changing the position of our tongue and throat, we can produce a note a sixth above. That is, we can produce the B note above. This is also true for all of these notes. So by using the same fingerings we used for the first 5 notes, we can produce another 5 notes a sixth above. We call this overblowing a note, and in this case it is called overblowing sixth. There are no doubt several ways to overblow a note, and you will find as you go up the chromatic scale, you'll find fingerings that you've used before, but now they are overblown versions of the fingerings. If we place these notes in the chromatic scale, you will see that we only now need to fill in the missing notes between these 2 sets of notes. However, there are so many different fingerings that you do not have to use these fingerings, and maybe other fingerings might be better for you to use. So the obvious question is, how do you overblow a note, and how do we overblow the palm D key in order so that we don't get out that high D note but we get the B above it? Now, when you overblow a note, basically what you're doing is using the same techniques as if you were playing overtones. When you play overtones, what you do, you finger the fundamental note, which is the lowest note, and then by changing the position of your tongue and throat, you are able to produce many notes within that harmonic series. And it's the same principle here, even though it's called overblowing. Basically, you finger the palm D key, you blow to get that high D note out, but then you change your tongue and throat position, and that allows you to produce higher notes or higher partials or higher overtones. One way you can try and do this if you're not used to doing it is to start off by practicing whistling. Now, it doesn't really matter if you can whistle or not, it's all about the position of your tongue and throat. So if you whistle a low note and then get higher, and then get your saxophone and then put your tongue and throat in the same position as when you were whistling those notes, but now you don't whistle, you blow in the saxophone while fingering that palm D key and then produce the note. What you're going to find is that when your throat and tongue are in the positions of those lower notes that you whistled before, when your tongue and throat are in those positions, the high D note will come out. But a point will come as you change the position of your throat and tongue as if you were whistling those higher notes. A point will come where it will change and you will no longer get that high D note coming out, but you would get that high B note coming out. And that's what you want. And once you get that high B note coming out, then you're going to have to tweak it a little bit. You're going to have to possibly move your tongue and throat a little bit just in order to get it into tune. But if you can overblow that palm D note to get the B, then you should be able to overblow the other following notes to get that whole set of higher notes. So having explained what we mean by overblowing a note, which is a technique that you will need to play those high altissimo notes, especially the double altissimo notes. Now let's look at the fingerings which I use, which are common fingerings, which are stable fingerings and in tune and ideal for the beginner. You should be able to play the palm keys, so D and E flat should not be a problem regardless of how you form your embouchure. The E fingering is more difficult. If you do not put your tongue in a high position, this note may not come out. You may sound a lower overtone which you don't want. So make sure that your tongue is in a high position and think about producing the sound E and give lots of air. Once you can get this note out, keeping your tongue and throat in the same position will allow you to get the following notes to come out. The F note should not be a problem since it's just removing one finger from the previous fingering. The F sharp may cause a problem if your tongue is not in the right position. However, the other fingering for F sharp is easier for me to play but has a different tonal quality to the sound. G is considered to be one of the hardest altissimo notes to play, and switching the finger positions from F sharp to G, which has a lot of closed keys, can be awkward and will need a lot of practice to make a smooth transition. Once you can play G, then A flat, A and B flat should not be a problem. The next real challenge is playing B. Now you can try to overblow the palm D. This will give you a B on the chromatic scale that we are following and a D concert pitch, or what you would see on a tuner. When I do it, the tuner reads a very sharp C sharp, and I need to do extra manipulation of my tongue and throat to get the tuner to read D. However, when I use the other fingering for B, the tuner shows D spot on without having to do extra manipulation. So I use this fingering instead of trying to overblow the D. But you should find out what works best for you. So to end this video, what I will do, I will show you some finger charts of the altissimo notes going into the double altissimo range for you to look at, to try out and see if any of those fingerings work well for you. If you want to see these fingerings demonstrated, then I have put links to other channels in the description where you can go to those channels, and a lot of those channels would have dedicated videos for each of these individual notes. So if you want to see many of the fingerings demonstrated, then that's the best place to go and look at, because most of these fingerings are common fingerings and you'd find them demonstrated on these channels that dedicate videos to individual altissimo notes. Well, I hope you found this video helpful and informative, and as usual, like, share and subscribe, and I shall see you shortly in the next video. Bye bye.